Advisory Board's November 7th, 2024 workshop. My name is Mark Wenzel, and I'm the supervisor of the Wildfire Safety Advisory Board branch at the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety. Before we start the meeting, I'll ask Sean Richards, one of the board's senior advisors, to talk about how to participate in today's meeting.
Thank you, Mark. We welcome public comments during the general public comment period on the agenda if desired after any agenda items. The public may participate and comment in person or remotely by Teams or by phone. Please note that the public comment may be limited to 3 minutes per participant. Participants will be called upon in turn. Participants can use the raise hand function on the Teams video conference, and they will be called upon. Participants on the phone may dial #5 if they wish to speak to be placed in the queue by the operator. Please note that the chat is disabled. You may send written questions and comments during the meeting to our email address at wsab@energysafety.ca.gov. You may also submit written comments after the meeting to the same email address, and that is wsab@energysafety.ca.gov, or to the docket for this meeting. Instructions for doing so are in the agenda. Written comments we receive will be posted on the docket portion of our website. Next slide, please. Relevant materials for today's meeting may be found on our website. The link can be found on the public agenda for today's meeting. Meeting materials are also available in the room. For those of you who are present in the room, you may sign in on the sheet at the entry. Now I'm going to turn over the meeting to Unique to review the building's emergency protocols for those of us in the meeting in person. Next slide.
Good morning, everyone. For those of you joining us today at the presentation, should emergency evacuation be required, please up the doors on my right-hand side, straight into the parking. Travel south down to our evacuation site, which is a parking lot of the Park Market. Also, the restrooms are located out of these doors on my left and straight down the wall.
Thank you, Sean and Unique. Chair Block, the meeting is yours.
Thank you very much. My name is Jessica Block. I'm chair of the California Wildfire Safety Advisory Board, and I will call this meeting to order. Today is November 7th, 2024. Our third quarter, no, this is a workshop meeting. This is not our quarterly meeting. Mark, will you please begin the roll call?
Chair Block.
Here.
Chair Block present. Vice Chair Porter. Here. Vice Chair Porter present. Board Member Armstrong. Board Member Haynes.
Here.
Board Member Haynes present. Board Member Mader.
Present.
Member Mader present. Board Member Cipher. Please the roll.
Thank you, board members, for being here today. I'd like to thank our Office of Energy Infrastructure IT, Lou Kong and Axel Homer. And I'd like to also thank our supervisor, Mark Wenzel, and our advisors, Sang Sobel and Sean Richards, and Unique Coleman for assisting with the organization of this meeting today. This has been a really special visit for us to be up here in this, on the actual northern part of the state. I'm glad to also report that we have a 7th board member that has been appointed and has been sworn in this morning, Mary Bell Batcher. And we welcome her and look forward to working with her. She's got a tremendous resume, and we're really looking forward to her contributions. Let's review the meeting agenda. In a moment, we'll begin the meeting with a vegetation management presentation from the Northern California publicly owned utilities. We'll start with a presentation by Nicholas Zettel from the Reading Electric Utility Director, followed by a presentation by Paul Hauser, General Manager, Trinity Public Utility District, and a presentation by Eric Brown, Manager of the Vegetation Management section of the Sacramento Municipal Utility District. The board will then discuss utility vegetation management, including the context and experience of Northern California publicly owned utilities. Next, the board will discuss agenda items for future meetings. We'll have a public comment section for matters not on the agenda. And finally, we'll adjourn the meeting. As an opening statement from myself, it's just been we've been thinking about coming up here for a long time and haven't had the ability. It's been a wonderful experience to actually see the utility infrastructure in the Northern California environment. It's wonderful to be in Reading. I want to thank the City of Reading Public Library for hosting us. Special thanks to Paul Hauser from Trinity for hosting our field trip yesterday and being able to see the infrastructure and talk about your challenges. It's really enlightening, helped us think about all the ways that we might be able to help. And definitely want to thank the staff and Mark for making this all work. Do any of my fellow board members have any opening comments? Big statements. Oh,
No, thank
John. Okay, so next we'd like to hear from Nicholas Zettel, Utility Director for Reading Electric Utility on vegetation management.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you to the board for having me here and for Mark and the staff for giving me this opportunity to get plugged in. Thank you for being in Reading. It's not hot. It's a perfect day. I think this is you picked up 1 week. It's 70 and perfect. It'll be raining next week and freezing cold. So I think we're doing good. Yeah, I just have kind of a quick deck today. I know where the focus is vegetation management, and there's plenty in here, but I think in the broader context of vegetation management, I wanted to walk through what Reading's been doing, some of the, I would call them enlightening events that got us to this point on top of SB 901, and then where we think we're headed. So I think there should be a slide deck. So where we'll go to the next slide. So just quickly, these are the stats on Reading. We're not that, I call us the biggest little utility in the world. So, I won't read the numbers off, but essentially we own and operate NERC registered transmission. We own and operate natural gas fired combined cycle power plant, peaking plant. We own and operate a small hydro unit. We trade energy in all the Western markets. We manage all commodities, and we're a vertically integrated utility, right? So all the way from finding it, manufacturing it, distributing it, metering it, and making sure everything's safe. We have full-time line crews, full-time vegetation crews, full-time meter shop, full-time physical service. And Reading has about 90,000 people in it, give or take, but the county, Shasta County, it's about 170,000. So there's a lot of folks during the day that drive in to work in what we would call the Reading metro area, which is a very metro. We have, as far as wildfire goes, I think it's important to talk about our tier 2 and tier 3 exposure levels. There's a lot of POUs that are mostly tier 1. We are not that. We have all three, both for our primary 12 kV distribution level and our 115 kV transmission level. So the numbers are on the slide there, but notably we focus 7 miles, 26.5 miles of 12 kV, and 8 miles of transmission, which is very important. And I'll get to that in a minute here. In Reading, the other notable item of operating a utility here is this is, from a weather standpoint, a very unforgiving environment. So in July this year, it was 119 degrees. And in the winter before that, we saw a low of, say, 26 or 27. So it will snow here. Even though we're about 500 feet of elevation, and then it will get very, very hot. So as far as a climate-ready utility goes, I kind of brag a little bit. We could be a good model, because if you don't know what Mother Nature is going to throw at you, this is a good place to come and look and see, how to handle it. So we'll go to the next slide. So the next two slides, as I mentioned, I'll call these our enlightenment events. This first event was the car fire in July 2018. I can't believe it's been over 6 years now, but this was a fire that started in the Whiskeytown National Park from, I believe it was a trailer had a flat tire, sparked a roadside fire, and then it burnt the park. I think you probably drove through yesterday on the way to Trinity.
Yeah.
So you saw the devastation. That fire blew down the hill towards Reading. By the time it got to Reading proper, it was in the form of a tornado, essentially, like an EF3 class tornado. It was so disruptive. There was a 230 kV steel lattice tower owned and operated by the Western Area Power Administration that moves power from Shasta Dam down south. It took that 230 kV tower, crumpled it, and made it disappear. So we, actually, I think they think part may still be in the river. But it was the most destructive thing we'd ever seen, and it taught us a real quick lesson about wildfire. How fast it goes from something you're watching out there to now it's right here. And we evacuated 30,000 people. The stats are on here of the destruction. And it taught us a lot about once a fire is happening, what do you need to transition to manage that event, right, in your emergency operations space? And really, it triggered a 360-degree change in how we operated in the situational awareness space of emergencies and then planning. So we'll go to the next slide, to the next slide of the thing. So just about 8 months later, we had an event that dumped 14 inches of valley cement snow, as we call it, all over town. And in Reading, in a town like Reading, we have a lot of live oaks and trees that have their leaves year round because we're in the valley. Well, when you put 14 inches of ultra high water content snow onto those trees, it bends them, it breaks them, and they land all into your distribution and transmission right away, and it caused absolute havoc. This event was something totally different than the car fire, which I would say was almost localized to the northwest portion of town. This event spread across our entire service area. At one point, we had about 75% of the service area was out of power, and it was all vegetation related, 100%. We had trees not in the transmission system, but we had trees in distribution lines. Customers with what we call their overhead drops, secondary services, those were ripped to the ground. And this outage took between 3 and 5 days before it was resolved. And one of the things we observed was the amount of vegetation that is at or near your right of way that may not be in your right of way, but it can be in your right of way very quickly when it gets snow on. Where a lot of other valley towns and public utilities might not ever experience that because you still get snow. But we're located, it definitely happened. Stats are on there, mutual aid crews, lots of hotels, restaurants, grocery stores are out of power. It was very, very destructive. One good outcome, because that was a pretty good outcome. One good outcome of this event was a massive removal of vegetation that could be threatening the right of way. So as we move to the next summer, it was probably nature's largest trimming event, especially for hazard trees and other vegetation that was outside our right of way, but could encroach into the right of way, from leaning and falling in. So we'll head to the next slide. These two events plus SB 901 really led us to our wildfire mitigation plan. It's really broken into 4 distinct areas. We have our prevention and improved response program, and our Reading Fire Chief, Jared Van Lantingham's in the audience today, and asked him to come because the Reading Fire Department is integral with our response program. We actually fund, and I'll get to this in a little bit, we fund 15 full-time firefighter positions to help staff up that response program. We're lucky enough to be a POU that has a fire department right here. And so you need to realize you can do everything you can in the prevention program, but if a fire starts, whether you started it or a different fire is coming towards your assets, at that point, it's out of your control. You need the response program, and that's the Reading Fire Department. The second part of our plan is our technology solutions program. We've deployed a lot of technology. We've built a state-of-the-art emergency operations center. Going through those 2 events and not having situational awareness where you want it, how you want it, was a huge learning lesson. Now that we have this EOC, And at any point in time, if any of the board would ever like to come up to get tour, we would love to do that. Having the EOC allows coordination and planning, and it falls into our emergency operations program, which is the third leg of the stool. We didn't really have a good emergency operations program up until those two events. Thinking through SB 901, thinking through wildfires, we developed an incident command structure that uses the same national ICS, whether it's state, federal, county, or city. We built the same structure for our utility. So we drill to it, we plan on it, we host summer drills, winter drills. Everybody knows their role, and we do it in our new emergency operations center. And if an event takes place that exceeds the scope and scale of just being electric only, we will then fold under the city's emergency operations center and act as a liaison and department. And if it gets bigger than that, I actually know the fire chief was out at the county's emergency operations center, we'll fold into that EOC. So we built an entire ICS to respond in the same fashion everybody else would. Then the fourth leg is the long-term plan. So looking at our system of, do we have the right wildfire system hardening features on the grid? What are we doing with our covered wire needs? What are we doing with our fuse needs? Where is the status of our cross arms, our poles? Are we wrapping poles? Where can we underground? All these things that take time, and they're part of a capital plan. So we built that, and it's actually built into our strategic plan, and we're quite far down the road there. So we'll go to the next slide. Part of what we learned is you can use the CPUC's map, which is a fantastic jumping point to understand your fire risk, your tier 1, 2, and 3. But what we decided is that we have local resources. We have the Reading Fire Department. We have CAL FIRE, mutual partnerships. We needed to get together and say, okay, let's take the Reading service area, starting with the CPUC base map. And where else are there risks here that might not be obvious to just an electric utility or somebody modeling from the PUC or a different modeling agency? And what we learned was, working with the fire department, is there's areas that would be considered, say, tier 2 traditionally, but we moved it to the high fire threat area because there's ingress and egress issues. There's choke points for evacuations. There's construction that's taken place that may not be up to date. There's old construction that we're not very satisfied with, say, fire safety and fire codes. And so working with the Reading Fire Department, we were able to, I would say, enhance and create our own wildfire risk assessment map, which for vegetation management has now allowed us to target, say, some of these circled areas you would say in the tier 2, say that cream area. Those are what we call tier 2. We actually moved those circuits into what we would put as tier 3 status. So in a red flag warning situation, you would disable reclosers, you move those to hotline mode, or fast trip, I think is a different way to look at the pictures. And then there's other areas in the pink color, the salmon color, where a lot of that was burned in the car fire. And you would think, well, it's already burned, so it's probably not an ultra high fire threat. But there was just a fire there this summer that burned again, right in the old car fire burner.
Which fire was that?
The name of it, but it didn't get very large. The fire department jumped on it with CAL FIRE. I think we're about 100 acres on it.
Okay.
But what shocked me, I guess, is just part of this, the fire behavior is now it moved fast and quick because it was burning on ground-based vegetation. And there was still old trees that had burned, and there's still fuel there. So never assume a prior burn is kind of off the high fire threat, because it's not. It's actually, it could be even faster. So let's go to the next slide. Kind of taking actions today. These aren't in any particular order ranking, but they do show that in all 4 areas of our wildfire mitigation plan, we have taken deliberate steps to improve the technology, improve the boots on the ground field of vegetation inspections. We had, I would say, an okay inspection program, and we enhanced it, just took it to a 10. where we have boots on the ground inspecting every inch of every mile of our lines using GIS data points. And they don't just mark a location, they'll mark a location and then they'll, start. What is the hazard here? Make the notes, take photos, all things need to do so that when our trim crews come out, they can see, am I looking at the same thing the inspector was? Because then we re-inspect. We added LiDAR scans to see from the top down, because when your boot's on the ground and you're looking up, you may not see everything you need to see, right? We installed fault indicators to help minimize outage times during red flag warnings if we do trip due to the ultra sensitive settings. Recently we moved every tier 3 circuit to hotline mode during red flag warnings, on top of the reclosers being disabled, which is like pretty standard now. And there was some hesitancy with that from my ops team because that is a mode that's usually only reserved for when you have line crews working on energized lines, and you want to set the setting so sensitive that it's going to just do a just in case trip for the most part. And of course, there was hesitation from the ops team of we might have a lot of what they would call, say, a nuisance trip. And I think, we just had to step off the cliff and put all the circuits in the hotline mode. And we went through we've been through 3 red flag warning events with high winds, with over 8,000 customers in the hotline. And we haven't had one trip, not one nuisance trip or any event that take place. So I think it was worth the risk. I think our customers appreciate that. We communicated that with them and said, we're going to take it to the next level. And that included some of the areas that we redefined. Yeah, let's get to the next slide here. So there's some more on, this is never done. There's more improvements to make. We're still supplementing our internal tree crews and contract crews. Actually, as the director, as a small utility, I think I just signed off on that agreement the other day to RFP to bring them in. Staying on the visual inspections. And then the other wonderful part of being a publicly owned utility in a fully integrated city like Reading is we contract with the Public Works Department to have ground crews come out and do pole wrapping, pole clearance, ground vegetation removal, and also we targeted several properties throughout the city that the city owned to do full vegetation removal to build fuel breaks, because we know where there's illegal camping, and we know where there's illegal camping, there's outdoor fires for cooking and warming, and we know where there's outdoor fires for cooking and warming, illegal camping, there's probably going to be fires that get away unintentionally. And so a lot of those take place on city-owned property. And we were able to build kind of a GIS-based map that says where does all that take place, where are the fires at, and where's the electric utilities assets at, and how do we get our ground crews in to work on clearing out that vegetation, working with the police department and the fire department to coordinate that. So it's just another advantage of using tools like GIS, which I think is the best thing. Honestly, I'm just geeking out on it lately. I think it's one of the best things that's ever come along when you're trying to do something at scope and scale of this. But taking advantage of every resource we have in the city, whether it's the fire department, parks and rec team, and police. Enhancing our inspection policies on item 2 here, just getting away from paper. Utilities have a hard time getting away from paper, which is, we've been doing this. Reading Electric's been here since 1921, so we're over 100 years of counting. And so, we moved to a new life cycle type system, uses electronic work orders. It gets all the information in the hands of whoever's doing it at the point when they need it in their tablets. And then prioritizing our vegetation and asset finding. So not everything is a crisis. Some things are. If you make everything a crisis, then nothing's a crisis, right? And so getting out there and coming up with a ranking system that the crews understand, that everybody's bought off on from in the office to outside, has helped a lot. And by setting that priority, within 72 hours, we can get hazard trees, hazard vegetation removed. That's our goal. Somebody sees it, within 72 hours, it's trimmed and gone and taken care of. And then system hardening initiatives, we're still wrapping poles in designated zones. We're just wrapping more poles. It's better to wrap them than not wrap them. And if you have a moment, you can check our Facebook posting. Yesterday, we put a post up that showed poles that were wrapped. And there was a fire, an illegal campfire, during a red flag day about a couple of weeks ago, the fire got out of hand. It was very windy that day and it burned all around our transmission poles, but it didn't harm them because of the wrapping. And so the plan is working. And then, of course, we're always looking at new pole top fire prevention measures. And another interesting thing about Reading with pole top measures is the squirrel and raptor guards. We have so many squirrels and birds here because we have so many trees and so many acorns. I mean, this is like wildlife central. And the squirrels, on a good acorn year, they use the lines like a superhighway, right? And we love our squirrels. We don't want them to get hurt, and we don't want them to be zapped and start fires and things. They do that. What we've noticed is by adding the squirrel guards, we put up hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. The system is, number one, we've reduced squirrel-related outages and definitely fires from squirrels. But even in non-parts of the fire season, we just don't have the animal-related outages. So you're seeing benefits from putting these fire mitigation measures in, even when you're out of the fire season. And so we'll go ahead to the next slide. Something else that I touched on, disabling reclosers in the high fire threat, and then collaborating with the fire department to treat new issues, implementing hotline. The next thing that we're working on as part of prudent utility practice is what are we doing to address preemptive de-energization or PSPS or insert, whatever acronym you'd like to use. And this is an interesting space for us as a utility. We are contained within 61 square miles. We have our own full-time fire department. We funded additional firefighter positions. They have an incredible. When we first started tracking wildfires as part of SB 901, we had about 9 fires that were started by our equipment. Of course, none of them got, I would say, bigger than an acre. None of them were catastrophic. They're put out right away by our response team, by the chiefs, firefighters. Last year, we were down to 5 fires. So, statistically speaking, we've really cut that down. Now, to give you some scope and scale, there was over 700 fires in the city in 2023. And our assets contributed to 5 of those. They're very small, none got over an acre, most were contained at least in pole. So what we're trying to do is this utility did not start from a bad place. We did not start from bad maintenance. We did not start from bad vegetation management. We started from a good place, and we're trying to get to great. And as you move up the curve, it starts to get asymptotic, where you get up towards the top and you're trying to close that gap to 0. That is very, very difficult. But we're trying, and we're looking at how do we do that? Because what we don't want to do is preemptive shutoffs, because Reading, as I would call it, the Valley Center, is where all the resources are. So this is where the 2 hospitals are. This is where the schools are, the grocery stores. This is where the majority of folks can do their shopping. The county and the surrounding counties actually depend on this city to be on. When there's PSPS happening outside the city limits, the resource centers are often put inside our service area for folks to come in and charge phones and get water, things like that. Air conditioning when it's hot. So we're looking at this very closely, and I'm asking my team to take a very scientific approach to it. Consider what is the design criteria of our distribution system? What wind speeds did we design our system to? Thankfully, like I mentioned, Reading is a very unforgiving place as far as climate goes. Our pole classes are much higher. Our crossarm classes are much higher. Our conductor wire, the clips, the insulators, everything is bigger here because we're used to high winds. We're used to high temperatures with a lot of, and like our diurnal temperatures, night to day, can swing 50 to 60 degrees. So you get a lot of thermal expansion. So talking to my engineering team, our system is very well built, but we still need to have a plan if a very high wind event comes in, that 100-year event. And we have our tier 3 areas that we know are high risk. And what if we have an open work order for maintenance on one of those areas? And we don't have the parts. Let's say a supply chain issue. We just can't get to it. What are we going to do? We know it's a risk. So we're looking at developing that strategy this winter. We want to have something for our 2025 wildfire mitigation plan. I don't want to set atone for the world that it's going to be perfect, but it will be something to start with. And then we'll learn with the rest of the utility space on where that's headed. Because as a valley town, it's very compact with fantastic fire response resources and a very well-built system. Our version of preemptive shutoff would not be the same as a POU that serves the mountains with ultra long distances over, mountainous terrain. It's very different, right? Paul and I's system from the Trinity PUD, which you toured yesterday, two completely different systems. And so we need different approaches. So we'll go to the next slide. And I'd be remiss to not put our goats up, right? The goat task force. So this kind of started as a an experiment of there's areas in Reading that are very steep in and out of the gullies and the valleys. It's difficult to get equipment in. It's even harder to get workers in. We contract every year with a goat task force. It started small. Now we're up to 400 or 500 goats at a time. And this is very effective. They do a wonderful job. Our town's used to it. They love it. They watch, the town actually tracks the goats where they're headed next. And what we do is we use the goats to target those open space areas that we need to be turned into fire breaks. And then the other picture is, this is actually the crew members from our parks team, our ground crews that we fund, putting up the pole wrap. And then, of course, another photo is what we would call a very nice looking right of way. Cleared, wrapped, and ready to access fuel break and not have any issues. So next slide, please. So outcomes and impact. I talked about we went from 9 fires to 5. We're tracking at a total of 5 in 2024. Hoping the fire season's done. Knock on wood, we've had some rain here. Some rain again on Monday. Fast response from the fire department. Staff culture is looking great. I would say part of developing this 4-wheel of response to wildfire, developing an emergency operations program, investing in the inspections, investing in the technologies, it just brings the awareness to the staff that always be on alert, always be ready. And everybody's a fire prevention officer and everybody's a firefighter, right? We all carry fire extinguishers, everybody's on the lookout and build the culture. It's been great. The community has great feedback. We're always talking to the community. How do we do better? What are we missing? Is there something, if you see something, say something to us. So going through the car fire for Reading was very traumatic. They're very attuned to something. If there's a tree towards a line, most of the calls I get is there's a tree touching the line, there's a tree in the line. It's communications lines, right? And so it doesn't matter. We want our customers to make the phone call. We want them to engage. We're going to go check it. And if there's a tree in the comms lines, then we'll reach out to the comms line. And then the risk of fire ignition, it's driving our focus. Talking with our fire department, talking with other fire response agencies, they see a high risk of a fire coming from the north side of town, which is not what we thought it would come from. So now we're looking at our north side assets. How's that being mitigated? Working with the city of Shasta Lake and James Takahara is the director up there. I'm good friends with him, we've known him for a long time. We work together on mitigation strategies that they're employing. So using the community. And that's about as far as we've gotten. I'm very proud of the staff. I'm very proud of our city, of our partners. Our city council is incredibly supportive. And I really appreciate the feedback from the board when we submit our plans. We use it, we take it, we integrate it, and we've been looking at the recommendations that you've put forth, and I think we're in line with that. We think we'd like to be able to do some of those recommendations. So at that point, I'll take any questions.
Yeah. So when Reading decided to enhance their tier 2 or tier 1 fire banks, what was the methodology you used to do that, and how did you allocate resources to the enhanced risk?
So it was I would call it pretty low tech. We met with the fire department, met with deputy fire chiefs, fire prevention, looked at our map, literally printed the maps out, put them on the desk, showed where we had to talk each other's talk. It's Jared's smiling, but with the chiefs. So there's the way the fire department talks, there's the way the electric utility talks. we're saying words like circuits and reclosers, and he's saying words like ingress, egress, signage. But once we got on the same page with that, started using the mapping, actually got pens out in this area, broad areas. Took that back to our GIS team, and they mapped it for us and built a high fire threat map. Then we took another look at that and said, did we get this right? Is this, you have to turn circuits into streets and homes and businesses, right? You really have to, you have to humanize it to where we are, where we live, where we work. That was the key. At that point, that's why I mentioned I love GIS. The GIS team, once we confirmed it, they started recoloring the circuits. Once we recolored the circuits, we could take that to our ops team and say, these circuits are now tier 3. So these are going to be disabled reclosers, move to fast trip, program these in SCADA. So when there's a red flag warning, we push the button. And so they were trained. And then the other critical item is you move that to the engineering field team that says, these are now tier 3 circuits. If there's work orders outstanding, open issues, these are priority. These are immediate. And so that was kind of an eye opener for, but one of the benefits, I guess, of being a small utility in a smaller city is you can move quickly, and we wanted to take advantage of that. But that's a really good question.
I appreciate the point that you made with regard to the car fire in 2018, and that what you've also seen more recently is that your equipment caused fires are down from 9 to 3 or to 5, and what you've also said is that you feel as though you're in a good place in regard to being able to garner feedback from the public with regard to their awareness and their preparedness. Can you describe a little bit of the outreach that you do to the public in order to be able to keep them aware, of something that was so catastrophic, but at the same time, 6 years ago, and it's other things step into our lives, and we change our priorities.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've actually studied what I call the issue attention cycle. There's 5 stages of it for all of us, and because the car fire was, say, 6 years ago, it could be falling off the issue. We all know what the latest issue attention cycle was. We've made it through election day, but we take a couple approaches to it. One is I keep my council informed through updating them on the wildfire mitigation plan, provide KPIs, statistics on how we're doing. Another item is continually posting on social media what's working. So just like we put out that fire that was near our assets, the poles are wrapped, just as a reminder to the public that that's still out there and we're still doing things. This past summer, through the Northern California Power Agency, it's the Joint Powers Agency that we're a member of, there was a legislative tour that came to Reading, and we actually drove through the car fire. We took the staff and on a tour bus, and we had a deputy chief, fire chief, McMurtry, attended and spoke from a fire department's viewpoint what was happening and what Reading Electric was doing, and also the city of Shasta Lake, James Harper was on tour. So making sure that our electeds know what's going on, and that way they can pass it down to the constituents. And we also maintain a website for open communication back and forth. If you see something, say something. But Reading's very communicative. People are very easy to talk to, and they'll reach out.
Another topic is, so I appreciate that. And so I think that taking notes as a board member, as well as for another hat that I wear. But let me see. In regard to the prioritization, and so from the perspective of vegetation management, what has over the last couple of years changed in your vegetation management in order to be able to respond to how it is that you prioritize where your risk is and how it is that you're mitigating that.
Yeah, I think one of the first things we had to do is look at our program, our vegetation inspection program. And we actually brought in a consulting company to help rebuild that. We had the way we were doing it, but we didn't want to make the way we did it better. We wanted to kind of start over with a fresh start. So they actually came in, looked at how we did it, found kind of the best parts, and then crafted a vegetation inspection program for us. That served as our platform to kind of jump in. And part of that was developing a prioritization system. Because it can easily, with small staff and small resources, based on the fire risk and the fear of fires from vegetation, everything can become a crisis, and then you get fatigued. So we needed a good system. So we built a prioritization system, especially on the 72 hours. Getting the inspections out, finding a tier 3 issue or an imminent threat issue, we knew, and we actually staffed up our vegetation crews as well as to get after it within 72 hours. So building a program, bringing more contract inspections out. We still have the staff to have a boots on the ground, inspection team using GIS with photography and all things we needed. We contracted, brought them in. Of course, when you do that and you hand inspect every inch of your system, it creates a lot of work because you find, is this within 6 inches or not? Is this within a foot or not? How far should you go back? Is this tree that's out of right of way that's a threat tree? Now we need to contact the customer, right? And so I think the inspection program helped getting supplemental staffing in, being surgical with it, not just hiring everybody and bringing a bunch of crews in and then we don't know what to do, but being surgical with the crews and the inspections. It's definitely showing the results. Mentioned yesterday, meeting started, it was gusting 40 to 45 here yesterday. And we didn't have one momentary outage. We had, for a town of 90,000 people, that speaks very highly of our vegetation system.
And one more question. Oh, good.
Just in relation to the vegetation management, how do you handle vegetation management in private property?
Customer contact. So going through the car fire, customers are very willing to work with us. Not every single customer, but most are, as long as it's not their favorite tree or, a tree that they don't want to remove. But one of the things we pride ourselves on, one of our supervisors for our vegetation team, he will go door to door and form relationships, talk through why we need to do it. We've even had to remove a tree that was a hazard tree on private property and work with the customer to kind of come up and say goodbye to the tree. It's just the individual had a close connection. And just respecting that. I mean, where I live, I've had to have trees removed from my property, and it's an invasive process. It really is. So we make a customer contact. We don't just show up same day we want to remove it. We form a relationship, explain the why, make the customer part of the process, part of the solution. And the other thing we always do is we always remove all the wood. What we learned from early processes with vegetation management is if you leave wood, you're leaving wood because it's really big. Customers can't get rid of that. They don't know what to do with it. And so we saw a lot of backlash in the surrounding area from that. So our team has always removed all the wood or offered for if the folks need it for fire and things like that. So just, I think putting a personal touch on it, but again, being a small utility, I think we have that ability. But we really don't experience a lot of issues. As a director, I think I'm laying them out. So we don't.
And this is your partnership with your suppression agencies. Taking the burns that you've had, how is that actually informing your veg management process moving forward? burn rates, types of vegetation that were resilient during burns? Is that being discussed?
Yeah, I think that, I was just meeting with the fire department the other day, and there's some concerns we have of prior burns leaving burn snags and trees that are safety hazard to the fire crews if they have to go out and do suppression out on a burn. But also the rate of fire, the speed at which it moves across the ground on prior burn areas, that is definitely a new item that we're looking at, and that falls. We are for cleared right away, what we've done for pool wrapping. We know, like up here in Reading, we know Manzanita burns really hot, really quickly. If we can, and most folks don't like a lot of Manzanita, if we can remove that from the right of way or even outside the right of way a little bit. Gray pine trees are very big and shallow rooted, and they will fall in the wind, especially during drought years. Getting those to be removed, because during a fire, those are usually, they burn and they'll still stand and they become a big risk. So just working with the suppression agencies and they kind of tell us keep doing what we're doing, which is a good sign. But yeah, learning that we need to build fuel breaks outside our right of way where we can on the public properties, working with the partners, that's been very valuable, especially where we have a lot of illegal campfires in open space areas with that vegetation that'll burn.
I'd like to segue that. That's like a perfect segue to my question. I really appreciate you're describing the dynamically changing wildfire environment that we're in. And it was our field trip yesterday was also really enlightening on how great wildfire that has occurred has created new risks that we haven't even thought about. I especially appreciated your proactive approach with the fire department on these homeless encampment areas. In my day job, I see wildfires starting all the time due to homeless, and you can tell based on their location that that's definitely what it is. Have you, can you speak more to how you're collaborating with the fire department? And I appreciate the Reading Fire Department representative here. If you have any comments or would like to speak to the partnership that you have, would appreciate it.
Yeah, so here's an example. We had, during a red flag event a few weeks ago, we had a fire start, tier 1, under our lines. Fire department responded right away. It's less than an acre. There was no obvious sign of how it started. So working with the fire investigator, with the Reading Fire Department, and with our field crews to go out and, okay, there's a pond, there's ducks and geese, there's where the fire started, there was no hardware on the pole. There's nothing broken on the pole. There was no fuses. So it's great to collaborate, because having this partnership, it's what happened here, right? What started this fire? Was it wind? Did we have conductors touch? Well, there's probably not. The spacing looks good. There's no clips. Okay, do we not have the bird deflectors? No, there's bird deflectors on the lines. And so having that resource beyond mapping and say planning, but real-time boots on the ground, studying it, understanding what we need to do better, that to me is invaluable. Having the fire chief in my phone on scary days is what we'll call him. He'll even admit, I've texted him, I'll say, I'm anxious, I'm nervous, how do we look? Especially when the city of Reading, which is fantastic, they'll send firefighters out to help other agencies on other fires. Of course, I'll text the chief and say, hey, how do we look for us? Is our response packet still good, right? So I think it's very fluid. It's very almost personal, right? And that is because we depend on each other. I'm 100. My utility is 100% dependent on the Reading Fire Department. If we were to start a fire.
Thank you. Yeah.
One more really important piece, and maybe the chief, if you'd like to have speak to it, is we have a mutual threat zone agreement with CAL FIRE. Yeah. And that is ultra helpful in our area, especially my tier 3 zones that are on the outskirts of town. There's CAL FIRE full-time stations that will respond to that. We also have the air attack base at the Reading Airport. It's recently been expanded to handle a lot of air attack. And CAL FIRE really use air attack resources in Reading to suppress fires. So I think as a director of Reading, I'm blessed and I would say sometimes you can be good or lucky. I'm lucky that we have so much suppression support right here in Reading.
Any comments from,
Sure, I would just add, thank you, Jared Van Lanningham, Reading Fire Chief. The relationship is key. If there's any takeaways from this conversation, it's about your local public utility and the relationships they have with the responding agencies in terms of the response package. Now, in terms of prevention and where we're headed in this region, this area, a little bit outside of the PU conversation is that the city of Reading, we just completed a new community wildfire protection plan, CWPP. So that document will help us go for further grant funding to help with removal of some of the dead and down piles that have been created from Snowmageddon, burn scar areas, things like that. So that will be an assistance to RAU protecting their assets, hopefully. And so hopefully we'll get some funding coming in through that document, and we'll also be able to create a vegetation management ordinance here locally inside the city of Reading that will assist our public and private property owners on what they need to do and tighten up our codes a little bit around veg management.
thank you. It really highlights how it's a community effort to make sure that we're safe from all ends of the community. Just want to check and make sure John doesn't have any comments or questions. Board Member Mader, do you have?
Thank you, Chair. I commend the relationship between fire and the utility. But I think that the number one thing that the utility should be concerned with is reducing sparks. I mean, that's where fires come from, right? And so I'm particularly fascinated by the work that is being done for animal control to provide those non-contact animal movement. I don't know that much about it. I've just heard what you presented in the meeting today. As a utility engineer who's had to deal with fires from so many different types of animal contacts, I'm always like from ringtail cats that like to take naps on top of our substation transformers that stretch out and creating places for them, alternative places. I'm always fascinated by ideas to divert animals into safer places. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, or get a contact number to learn more about the work you're doing, especially the squirrel work. That was particularly interesting.
Sure, yeah, we can definitely provide some more follow-up, and I can maybe connect you with somebody on our engineering team. But yeah, I mean, these are really low-cost features, and they're fast. They're really fast installs. Usually don't even require an outage, and you can put a small crew together, stop pole by pole by pole while they're there, go to the non-expulsion fuses, put up the squirrel raptor guards, put the covered wire jumpers on, so we don't have an event from those. And I think exactly to your point, you never know what animal this could be. It could be a turkey vulture, it could be a squirrel. Animals they're very busy. And so, interesting, where there's trees, there's animals. Where there's trees and power lines, there's animals. And so we really want to reduce those sparks. That has been, and I mentioned even on non-fire season, having those measures installed is reducing the outages. Some outages, some fires you'll never get away from it. Here's an example. Last year, the first day of school, it was 112 degrees. A microburst of wind picked up and took somebody's outdoor umbrella, their pool umbrella from their backyard, and sent it into our 115 transmission line. And then it was an underbuilt with 12 kV wires. And so the metal pole acted as a link to, of course, burst into flames immediately, start the flaming pole, then landed on the ground in the right of way and started fire. I guess whatever was left of it. We had just cleared and masticated the area, and the person wasn't home, actually, who's they had no idea. Fire department was there within minutes and put the fire out. But there's risks. You can never mitigate your way to zero, I think is what we're learning. Because there's things that happen you never thought in a million years would take place, like somebody's outdoor patio umbrella would fly into your transmission lines. So.
Well, absolutely. We operate the system with an acceptable amount of risk, right? That's inherent in operating an above ground electrical utility system. But I seem to have heard that you were putting some sort of alternative path without being able to contact the wire for the squirrels to move around. Is that maybe I misunderstood?
No, it's a cover. It's a plastic cover that will go over the conductor. So as they cross over the cross arms, they
Gotcha.
They run on top of the cover and do it very safely.
And usually, your crews can apply that without an outage.
Yes.
And usually with a lifeline tool.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's more of standard type of animal abatement kind of equipment. That it's not, you're not installing some other alternative non-conducting path.
No, we're not.
Okay.
But I think
I
the key
maybe I
is,
misunderstood from your presentation.
yeah, and I think the key is that the amount of the installations that we're doing. What I guess what I'm trying to say is don't try to guess what the squirrels are going to be. You'll never guess right. Just, install as much, it's very low cost. Install as much of it as you can.
They're going to be everywhere.
They're everywhere. Yeah, make it a standard feature, so to speak.
Gotcha. Right. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We are holding off on public comment and question until the end of all presentations, right? So I'd like to move on to our next presenter. Paul Hauser, will you, please join us at the table. He's General Manager of Trinity Public Utility District and led our field visit to the service territory yesterday. Thank you very much for being here and hosting us. We learned a lot yesterday. Floor is yours.
Sure. Okay, you already got it up. So thank you for coming up, Commissioner Porter, Mr. Block. Tim, hope to get you up sometime soon. Really appreciate you taking the time to come see our system. I've got a short presentation, but I know I did this a little bit yesterday, but not everybody was there for it, but I like to contrast them. So just to kind of set the table a little bit, when I hear Nick refer to Reading Electric Utilities as a small utility, I have to smile a little bit. And full disclosure, I worked with Nick for about 6 years. I was in Reading prior to Trinity. And of course, compared to SMUD, Reading is a small utility, but compared to Trinity PUD, they're a very large utility. I mean, to set that table a little bit, I think Nick he can give real numbers, but some familiarity. Probably has 200 employees. I have 25, including myself. I think we have 16 million in annual revenues. Nick probably has 15 times that level of revenues. The suppression cost was really interesting, or the suppression resources. We have CAL FIRE and U.S. Forest Service suppression resources in terms of proximity. It's a completely different ballgame, as you know, from being up there. Nick mentioned they have 61 square miles. We have 2,200 square miles. Our line mileage is very similar. I think he said 761 or something like that. We're a little over 700, but all 700 are in tier 2 versus about 175 miles in tier 2. Obviously, you saw the vegetation completely different between here and there. And then, I'm in between SMUD and I've seen Eric's presentation before, and you're going to see a real difference even in the presentations in terms of capabilities. So SMUD probably has 150 times. If Nick has 15 times our revenue base, SMUD has 150 times our revenue base. And how many employees? I have 7,200 meters. SMUD probably has 2,500 employees, right?
2,000-ish.
Yeah, so their employee base is kind of in a similar level as our customer base. So you're getting the full spectrum I just like to set that table in terms, because as a small utility, we only look at things that are possible. And so that's the things we pursue, and things that might be possible for SMUD or even Reading are just simply not possible for us, given our rate base. So you can jump to the next slide. Oh, before I forget to, Nick reminded me in his presentation, it's interesting, the goats. The goats are very popular in Reading. We actually tried goats as well, but the contrast territories, we use a guy out of Red Bluff that's, yeah, so we brought him up. We thought, this total candor is, I don't know how meaningful it could be in the scale of your full vegetation management program, but it's great PR, right? The guy lost 3 goats to mountain lions. The first week he left and said, never call me again. A little contrast between, what's possible here and what's possible there.
Don't those sheep herding dogs help with that? I guess.
They protect against coyote
Yeah,
and dogs,
Not
mountain lions.
yeah.
They're.
The goats were very popular with the mountain lions in the area. They were there a week and said, never call us again.
Okay.
Dog's breakfast or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we faced a fire in 2017, the year before the car fire, and it was a game changer for us. It was a 22,000 acre fire. It, seems kind of quaint by today's standards. I think the car fire was 220,000 acres or something close to that. Impacted Reading much more than us, but we suffered severe outages during the car fire and a little bit of system impact, nothing like Reading did. But as a result of that fire, called the Helena Fire, the U.S. Forest Service did an investigation, and they blamed the fire on our power lines. We did our own investigation, and still to this day strongly believe that our power lines didn't start that fire. But regardless, as a result, we faced $138 million in claims. I mentioned previously we're a $16 million utility. Then we were less than a $16 million utility. So there's no universe in which we could pay $138 million. We ended up settling for our insurance limits at the time, which were $10 million. But that was what really started our utility's focus on, it will sharpen your focus when it's a threat where there were times when I believed the utility was going to declare bankruptcy, would no longer exist, maybe PG&E would absorb us. Fortunately, none of those things happened, but those kind of events really change your focus, and they did for me, my staff, and our board. So we really started looking at things differently, and we looked at what can we do to mitigate this fire danger. And, you hear a lot of talk of undergrounding, and probably these comments won't be super popular, but I'm used to not being super popular. Undergrounding was never going to be any meaningful part of the solution for us, and I would argue it's not really going to be a meaningful part of the solution for any utility, and some utilities may take issue with that statement. But as I get into a description of our right-of-way widening project, I'll share those cost numbers, and I think it's always important to realize that, nobody has unlimited resources, and money you spend in one way, you can't spend it in another. You can jump to the next slide. Yeah, I kind of already covered this. You can jump to the next one as well. For those of you that were up and saw our service territory, it's not a valley service territory. It's rugged, mountainous terrain. Drive times for us can be 2.5 hours, parts of our system. It can be even longer to get into really remote areas. I mean, we have some areas that even in the summer, we have to access with a snowcat or hike in. We set poles with helicopters. We don't have our own, obviously, but we contract that out just because it's the most cost-effective way to do it. But so we have, even for fire suppression resources, parts of our system are very far away. And, 150, 200 foot tall Doug fir, ponderosa pine, sugar pine, it's a mixed conifer forest with extremely large trees and very narrow rights of ways. And, we inherited these rights of ways from special use permits for utilities that were our predecessors. Trinity PUD has only been in existence since 1982. And when we looked at possibilities, it wasn't just the most cost effective, but the only realistic possibility we felt was dramatically widening our rights of way. So, we started that process, and we arrived at a figure of 130 feet. And there's some light. You can go to the next slide. This is a picture of one of our right-of-ways and a tree down into it. But that right-of-way evaluation process, we partnered with Western Area Power Administration, who also had a 60 kV line. They have about 18 miles of 60 kV line that serves 94% of our load, and they had an interest in widening their right-of-way as well, even though they were already at 80 feet, we're at 20 feet, 10 feet from center line, again, with 150 or even 200-foot tall trees, as you saw yesterday. When you walk into that right-of-way, you look up and say, this is woefully inadequate. What the LiDAR analysis showed us, WAPA first did it on their 60 kV line, and they showed going from 80 feet to 130 feet would reduce tree to power line contacts by 94%. And as you would imagine, as you go bigger, there's diminishing returns. We later did a similar analysis on parts of our system, kind of representative areas of our system, and we saw, unsurprisingly, a 98% reduction because we were going from 20 feet wide, 10 feet from center line to 130 feet wide. We looked at the cost of doing this, and I'll just share the budget now. So the budget is roughly $4 million for environmental permitting. That's NEPA, CEQA. The Western Area Power Administration is the lead agency for the NEPA process. Trinity PUD is the lead agency for CEQA. Unfortunately, I'm budgeting about $1 million for litigation because we look at how these projects go, and it would be irresponsible to think it's not going to be litigated. I'm like, yeah, that would be great if that happens. And then roughly $15 to $20 million to implement the project. You can jump to the next slide. Yeah, this is a picture of what a right-of-way looks like. You have to kind of squint and see where the power line is when you're looking at those aerial photos. But so let's kind of wrap that up, and let's be optimistic and say that's a $20 million figure. If I wanted to take $20 million and do undergrounding instead of widening the right of way, I could underground 4 miles, or I could widen 200 miles of right of way. So we use a conservative number on our system, and to underground everything's probably $500 million. When you're a $16 million utility, that's impossible. We actually face some criticism in our NEPA and CEQA document that, well, you didn't fully analyze undergrounding. Well, my response is we only analyze what's possible. Why would we spend money to analyze the impossible? But even larger utilities where it might be possible to do some amount of undergrounding, it's still the same ratio. Are you going to underground 4 miles, or are you going to treat 200 miles? And we have to have that discussion. Now, yeah, I know those who were up yesterday, Trinity is usually considered the poorest county in the state. Our rate base can't withstand large expenditures. And when you have as small a rate base as we do, it just gets to the impossibility of undergrounding being any meaningful part of the solution. We can go to the next slide. I think we got a video here. Yeah, let's see. Hopefully. Well, yeah. Let's see. Yeah, it'll play. So look closely. That is a right of way. And that is a power line. And I have to say, when you're in it, it looks better than it does there, because those trees are 200 feet tall. Some of them, but this is a typical right of way for us. You see, there's dead trees in there too. The other thing I mentioned that we're seeing, Nick talked about drought. In the last 3 years, we're averaging 10,000 tree removals a year, and that's above and beyond our regular trim cycle. 10,000 removals. These are dead and dying trees. When we get, and I'd like you to just try to visualize, instead of that tiny, inadequate right way, 130-foot easement, and what difference that would make. Also, like Nick talked about, we're going to see dramatic benefits, and we're already in increased tree trimming. We've tripled our vegetation management budget, we're already seeing real reliability benefits. We expect this project will bring massive reliability benefits. But the bottom line for us is, we think it's the only realistic option we have for a utility with our resources. I like some of the questions about how do folks respond, when you go to private property. Bluntly, our biggest danger is on federally managed land because they haven't done a lot of management, bluntly. And the fuel loads are much higher, access issues are much worse. So it's more likely you have a fire start. If you do, it takes longer for suppression to get there. We're even, in Reading, the fire trucks probably get there faster than a plane can get to where our fires are. So it's just, you have to think of things differently. Can you go to the next slide? So you can start it over. You want to skip to the next one? Yeah, and this talks about the NEPA and CEQA document. And this reminds me of the timing involved. So we are now a little over 4 years into the environmental process. And you see there, I think that number may have gone up, I'll lose track, but a 40,000 page environmental document. All of those 4 years mean we're living with that fire risk for all of those years. Now, I know it's probably beyond the scope of your charge here to reform, well, certainly NEPA, but maybe not CEQA. I think we have to be able to get to these things a little more quickly. Litigation, you already have a NEPA attorney. She tells me 2 years is what, if we're litigated, we should expect another 2 years. That fire risk is not going away. Every year we live with it, and we can't address it until we get a permit that allows us to do this work on the ground. So those are some things we'd love to see some improvement on. I know I can't ever talk about wildfire without talking about strict liability, and I'll apologize. I know both of you yesterday heard it, but it continues to create perverse incentives in a utility business. I think much less so for publicly owned utilities. If you're SMUD, if you're Reading, if you're Trinity, we see our customers at the grocery store, at the post office. The idea of our infrastructure starting a fire that burns up someone's home or, heaven forbid, even causes a death, it's just something you never want to consider. But if you just look at the dollars and cents aspect, when you're held responsible for all the damages, even when you do everything perfectly, it gives you an incentive to do less, not more. And that's what strict liability is doing. I know there was a lot of agreement yesterday that we need reform. Politically, it seems to be very difficult. But I don't see how we really improve things as much as we can without strict liability. We're the only state with it. It seems unlikely that the other 49 states have it wrong and we have it right. I guess that's possible. It doesn't seem like it from my perspective being here. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, some of this I talked about already. You can go to the next slide. Oh, another thing I mentioned yesterday that I will talk about, in terms of what's possible for us. We are partnering with a private firm called AI. We've been kind of a beta tester for them for several years. They're using satellite imagery to capture tree encroachment data, and the technology is improving pretty rapidly. I think we've been with them. We've been working with them about 3 years, and in the beginning, I had some doubts whether this tool would be worthwhile for us, but it's looking more and more like it's going to be very worthwhile. Not only is the locational imagery and representations getting better in terms of, especially with a 2,200 mile service territory, to tell you, here's areas where we think you have problems, to send your field people out to make sure. Like I said, it's a tool. It doesn't replace those field inspections. But they're also capturing tree health issues through analyzing the colors of the trees. That's still in its early phases, at least what we've seen, but it has some promise. The other thing that is improving is we have 7 drone pilots and more drones than that. We capture a lot of drone footage. We're now sharing that with this company. It's much higher resolution than satellite imagery. We think it's going to dramatically improve the product. They have aspirations to sell this to much larger utilities, so they're working with us as a really good test case for what's possible. Here's the next slide. Yeah, this is some of the LiDAR analysis. You can't really make this out, but it kind of shows at different right-of-way widths what kind of predicted tree contact reductions we get. You can go to the next slide. And that's really it. I like to get to the questions. I've tried to guess at the things you might want to know, but I really want you to ask me the things you really want to know. If I can't answer it, I know Nick can.
So I have it was very interesting throughout the presentation yesterday. There are 3 tiers you can take, or 3 approaches. And I was moved by the fact that you're looking at, as the board and as management of that utility, at the most effective approach with the resources you have. And our last stop, very effective in showcasing the 130 feet of right of way, because we were in a corridor there where almost every tree was a hazard. However, the right of way just sitting there, it looked clear, but really everything within 15 feet was 120 to 200 feet tall. The drone footage, the drone demonstration coupled with the AI, very interesting. With that, how far along are you with the actual process of implementing the RAC? Which is,
Yeah, that's a great question. I should have said that. So we expect to have a document out in early spring for public comment. Now, we've already been through 1 round of comments. This will be the final round of public comments. Yesterday, the first round of comments, and this was years ago now, we received a little over 400 comments, but interestingly, only, I think, 28 were from citizens in Trinity County. So these projects get a lot of even national support, well, not support, attention. But the idea would be a final final document, EIS out for public comment in early spring, and a final document by end of year 2025. If there were no litigation, we could begin work in 2026. If there is litigation, that would move to 2028 and all that.
What are the reasons why the permitting, what are the reasons that you're given that the permitting is taking so long?
So I'm going to give you some granular information. One advantage of only having 25 employees is you get to be involved at levels that otherwise you wouldn't be. So, and maybe naive is a little strong, but maybe not. So I was a little naive going into the NEPA and CEQA process. I had been around those processes before, but not to this extent. But I'll just give you an example. The agencies involved, WAPA, Western Area Power Administration, is the lead agency on the NEPA. And of course, it involves U.S. Forest Service, who has we have a lot of right of way with them. Also, the Bureau of Land Management, we have a very significant amount on there. And it's not like BLM land in Nevada. This is, big Doug Fir, just happens to be BLM. And we've got a tiny amount with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. That part has been pretty negligible. But as you go through the review cycles with the agencies, we submit a project, that bluntly is exactly what I want to begin with. Of course, I wish it just stopped there, right? We'd already be implementing, but that's not how it works. I'll give you an example. We had to do an extensive visual analysis. There are campgrounds, or if you're floating on a kayak down the Trinity River, if we remove these trees, we don't want you to be able to see the power lines. The public, you have to mitigate that problem. And I see Nick raise his eyebrows. That's exactly what happened to me during the process, because I thought, well, if there's a fire, this is going to look like a moonscape. And isn't that a visual impact? the answer I get from the agencies is, well, that's a hypothetical. We know you're going to remove the trees. My argument is it's not really hypothetical. It's if, it's not if, it's when. But we spent a year on visual analysis. So to get to this granular level, Tim, is when we did 4 rounds of comments with the agencies. The level of comments, so you would expect, my naive beginning, okay, so like, I'm just gonna pull out a number. I think in the first round, your BLM had roughly 300 comments on our first draft. And I forget the Forest Service number, but we addressed those comments. And then you bring it back for another round, and you would expect, well, maybe we'll have 50, right? Well, no. And by each agency, in some rounds, the actual number of comments went up. And you're probably thinking, well, how could that happen? Because that's what I thought. There is so much turnover at the agencies, and there's so much time involved in the process that you get new reviewers every time. So the people that reviewed it a year ago are not reviewing it the next time or the next time, and they all have different thoughts. And what you quickly realize is we've got to get this out on the street or we'll be in a perpetual review. And there's, our latest delay, this is going to sound trivial, but it's a 40,000 page document roughly. Well, there's a new federal requirement that the NEPA can only be 300 pages. Yeah. So what you do is you write a kind of an executive summary and you put everything in an appendix. And it actually makes the document less readable because you have to refer to the appendices, but you have to meet this legal requirement. So that took 3 months to reorganize a 40,000 page document. So I don't want to give you too many horror stories, but these are the things that take so long. NEPA reform, it's a big one. It has to happen at the federal level. There are similar circumstances on the CEQA side of things as well. And I see Redding and Smud here, they're thinking, well, we're not going to undertake a project like this. If you do, give me a call first. But again, for us, we didn't have any choice. This is it. And I can't get a permit without doing NEPA and CEQA. I can't widen the rights of way. And to be honest, even if we were underground, we do a NEPA. I don't think it would be any easier or shorter or less expensive. Sorry for that long-winded answer.
No, but what are you advised in terms of what you can do about this? I mean, is it head down, blinders on, continue the process, or is it there's measures that you could take, in order to be able to draw the attention of others that may be able to see this for what it is and recognize that there needs to be a time limit, and otherwise you got the scope creep that you're dealing with.
So excessive candor is just one of my character flaws, but I'm really going to answer your question. Nick already knows it. So there are things. Congressman Huffman has been very supportive of our process, and he has a staff person in Eureka that kind of covers Cherokee County. His name's John Driscoll, and have a good relationship with that office and with John. I'm not going to get into specifics, but there was an occasion where I thought things, particularly at the Forest Service, weren't going as fast as they should. And John actually called me out of the blue and asked me about this particular project. And he caught me at a bad time because I really gave him the real answer. And he got pretty energized and he called the Forest Service. I got spanked later.
Yeah.
That's just what happens, right? And so what I realized is I better keep my mouth shut, or this is going to take even longer. And that's just real candor. And, people are individuals. But in terms of mitigating things up front, this project I consider essential to the survival of the utility long term, if you look at our fire risk. I could not have undertaken it if the Western Area Power Administration had not agreed to be the lead agency. And the reason there, well, one is a capacity issue. Neither the Shasta Trinity nor the Reading Field Office for BLM, I think, had the capacity to be the lead on this. But WAPA understands the power line business, right? So it's not that they write it just the way I want, but it's at least has a focus on protecting power line assets, and, from fires and from trees. Had WAPA not agreed to be the lead agency, I don't know that I could have taken it. And I would share that advice with anybody considering a similar project, because you have to have a federal agency as lead for NEPA. We could do it for CEQA, and that's easy, right? Because I have more control over that process as lead agency.
You may be a unique utility in regard to the footprint that you serve and the limited resources that you have available in order to be able to, do your vegetation management. But I would have to imagine that other utilities are similarly situated in that they have land within or wires within federal land that you need to be able to get the permit in order to be able to do the tree trimming, in order to be able to mitigate the risk of your wires or their wires causing wildfires. And so it would just seem to me as though with that as a basic assumption, it would be that the state is not going to be able to mitigate the risk of wildfires in those lands that are going to require a permit to be able to do the vegetation management.
You're very right. Jessica Nelson's here, Plymouth Sierra Electric Co-op, Quincy area, very, very similar to our utility in terms of size, risk profile, federal land. So I would say they're almost identically situated to us.
But wouldn't that also apply to the PG&Es of the world?
Yeah, PG&E, in our area, PG&E, well, we now have all the distribution, but they have transmission, not the same risk profile, but PG&E also has distribution just outside our service territory in Trinity and Humboldt County, exact same issue. And you're right, the state can't mitigate land management practices on that federally owned land. Now, maybe the state can try to influence, just like we do, those practices, but it certainly can't dictate.
I have things I want to talk about, but I don't know how constructive they are.
Just follow my lead and do it.
I was really struck by the amount of tree mortality and the knowledge that we gained from understanding that tree mortality instigates greater tree mortality with bark beetle or proliferation in those dead trees, and that burned trees standing are part of that problem. So when we were looking at that beautiful forest, it looked like a runaway train, and wanted to think more practically about wind and tree health and how the right-of-way, when you have to expand that right-of-way to do business, but in some cases, I've heard of tree removal allowing for the weak debris and weak trees to fly, to have sort of access into the right-of-way. And so, again, this is a federal lands problem, and we know that that takes forever, and it's a manpower problem, and it's a logistics problem that looks impossible. But as I said yesterday, I'm eager to think about it and try to come up with solutions that help prevent the loss of the forest in its entirety, which is what it appears to be doing. So appreciate that opportunity to think about it.
Your point is great, and what would be great is to bring you back. Unfortunately, it's going to be a few years. If I'm realistic. After implementation, we're still going to be removing trees. Now, it shouldn't be at the scale we're doing now, but hazard trees will still exist even with 130-foot right-of-way. Just before I quit, I'll give you an example. On that right-of-way we ran down that steep hill, there was a fire, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, This was caused by a healthy tree that was outside the easement, but the tree was 175 feet tall probably. But a snag 100 feet from it, a dead tree,
Yeah.
actually fell and hit it, knocked the healthy tree into the line,
Right.
caused a fire. My own guys ended up putting the thing out because we could get there and it was, I don't know, maybe an acre. But these are the kind of things you don't get to zero risk, right? But and we're going to have to maintain a healthy right of way, even at 130 feet. We know we won't be done. It's not, we're going to clear it and maintain it. That's all over.
Because the trees are taller than 130 feet.
Yes.
But they can be, if healthy, if allowed to be healthy, allowed to be the strong trees that
Yeah.
could potentially protect the line, then it's not so bad.
Right.
Board Member Bader.
Thank you. First off, the schedule says that that this was going to be presented by, I'm sorry here, Paul Hauser, but the presentation is,
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't change the name. I plagiarized
Okay.
my.
okay.
Sorry.
All right, great. Okay, good to know. So
Dave works.
I'm talking to Mr. Hauser, right?
Yes, you are.
Okay, great. A couple observations. I think that, shall we say, some of the challenges that you bring up working with different agencies not governed by the state, when you're being mandated by the state of California to adhere to certain standards, I think that's not unique. I totally acknowledge that that's something that is a challenge for Trinity, and I think, and you pointed out, that's not unique to just Trinity. That's all the utilities that have facilities on Forest Service or Bureau of Land Management. All of those, those are definitely challenges. I think that seems that things have improved some, but there's still coordinating all those different agencies. You can't even get a hiking permit. You have to sometimes, if you want to go on a backpack trip, you have to do it with 4 different or 7 different forests, right? And so it can be incredibly difficult. And I also concur that the people that are doing the reviewing, sometimes they may not have the experience to understand what they're asking for and the impacts that would have upon the resources of a utility for the perceived gains that they're getting. I think, like, for instance, we've had meetings about the concepts of above ground protected lines, and that's something that would not have been, the public would know what would object to that completely, but I do see a difference in at least the public's receptiveness to alternative ways of distributing power that brings out, but reduces the exposure to trees, to overhead line. But still, the agencies, they haven't seemed to. Sometimes they don't seem to catch up. Your thoughts?
Well, there's nothing there I can disagree with, that's for sure. You remind me that we've looked at covered conductor as well. Pole loading would be an issue for us with covered conductor. That's probably a $250 million solution, which again is impossible. More than 80% of our poles would have to be replaced if we went to covered conductor just for pole loading issues. So, I mean, you're basically talking about rebuilding a system, spread over 2,200 square miles and serve 7,200 meters. So again, we didn't analyze it in detail because it's impossible.
I'm actually, the technology I was talking about there is above grade, just basically having some way of putting out, say, concrete encased above grade distribution lines. There's some work being done on that. I completely understand your point about pole loading, especially I've reviewed your plans many times to provide feedback. and the guying requirements in some of the trees that you have on the slopes of the that covered conductor is not feasible in your situation.
Glad to hear you concur. I've seen a little bit about what you talk about, this, not really underground, but along the ground. I haven't seen an installation in person at all, and I'm not aware of any at scale. Would love to get you up for a visit though, and kind of show you our terrain in terms of, the feasibility of that. I know it's fairly new, and I'll just maybe be too blunt. I'm very skeptical that could be a realistic solution for us, given our topography and terrain. It's extremely challenging.
And I will take you to Calaveras County and show you 21 miles of concrete covered distribution wire from Soda Springs, from Salt, the substation that has been in place for 30 years. Right.
What's the cost per mile?
Well, the cost per mile on modern construction is completely different. This was done back in the day when basically the crews in that particular area they were slated with building a line through granite and for 14 miles, and instead they just laid the wire on the ground and poured concrete over it and let nature take its course. And it's still in service, so it can be done. Right, there's empirical proof, and I'll be happy to get together with you and go over the particular circuit. There is, I know that. Say again?
I'd love to look at it.
That'd be great. I remember going out in a snowcat because it rock shifted and it broke one time, and we had to find it. And it has its own issues, but starting fires or being exposable to debris from tree branches or anything, starting fires, trees falling into it, that's not going to be a problem with this type of with above grade. I know that PG&E has installed some programs. I am not aware of the cost per mile yet on the type of material, but so those are questions I'd like to get answered myself.
Board Member Mader, I'm writing that down as an objective to follow up on. We need to move on to the next presenter, but I think it's a worthwhile discussion to follow up on. Anything else you'd like to close on? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I'd love to continue the discussion about strict liability. I have that, we've done many projects talking about, that they're basically required that we have a zero risk environment. That's what's required here because of strict liability, and that has consequences on reliability. And so, love to talk to you about that sometime. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Mader. Let's move on to the presentation by Eric Brown, Manager of the Vegetation Management Program at Sacramento Municipal Utility District. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
The floor is yours.
Appreciate it. Grateful for the opportunity.
And pardon me, thank you very much for your presentation.
For having me.
Carry on.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate Paul and Nick being the tip of the spear and sharing their status and conditions. You'll hear some similarities here at SMUD, and you'll hear some differences on things that we're on and we're doing. I just share a little bit that we're all on a journey of some kind, but we all have different variables on that journey. Demographics, environmental conditions, physical conditions. So not one system is great for everything, and I think you need to be really cautious about making sure that you tailor it for your particular footprint. So I'll start out with this particular photograph, and this isn't a web-based photo. This is one of SMUD's right-of-ways up in the El Dorado National Forest. So you'll see several of these photos going forward, and they're all of actual right-of-way conditions, and I'll give you some additional feedback. SMUD looked at this as back in 2018, 2019 from our CFO, previous CFO and Chief Risk Officer, all in one, Jennifer Davidson. We were starting to see catastrophic events that have been going on for some time in the state. And what we started to see were insurance premiums exponentially increasing. And obviously being the CFO, holding all of the financial obligations and responsibilities, but also holding all the risk responsibilities, being the chief risk officer, she came to me and said, hey, what are you going to do about this? How are we going to manage this? And first and foremost, I said, we need to quantify our risk. That's what we need to do. And both Nick and Paul have talked a little bit about how they quantified their risk with some of the technology. You'll see some similarities here. And some of the differences, I'll tell you from SMUD's perspective, we are a vertically integrated utility. We have 11 reservoirs and 9 hydrogeneration facilities in this watershed. So when I started looking at our risk profile, but also long-term outcomes coupled with environmental sustainability, environmental stewardship, I'm looking at things from the landscape level. I'm looking at things at a watershed level, not just a linear corridor. And then the last bullet here, you'll hear a little bit more about this as we go along. We'll talk a little bit about NEPA, Paul's favorite topic, and how we were able to do some of this work that were partnered with federal landowners under the lowest level of NEPA, called a categorical exclusion, not a 7 and 8 year process with an EIS and an EIR. So there are other ways to approach this. But you also have to have a willing landowner. You have to have a willing partner. Someone who's focused on solutions and not barriers. Next slide, please. So just a little step back in memory lane, because SMUD is a small entity. We have 900 square miles. But I have previously worked for Pacific Gas and Electric for 20 years in the vegetation management program. And I actually took this photograph on the Plumas National Forest around the 2009-2010 timeframe after we completed a fuels reduction effort on the Plumas National Forest on this 115 kV transmission line. So what you're actually seeing is 12 months after the work that we completed this work on. And what was our recipe? Many people will look at this photo and think that we did a lot of seeding, hand seeding to get these conditions. That's the first place everybody gravitates to. And I would too if I wasn't involved in it. But there was no seeding. This was generated out of Mother Nature's natural seed bank. So the fuels reduction work that we did, the actual partnered logging that we did within Plumas National Forest, what we did was ultimately open this up to precipitation, competition, sunlight. And that was what was created after 12 months. Yes, we used utility vegetation management professionals, licensed and credentialed professionals partnered with Forest Service and federal land manager, added lots of levels of confidence, trust right out the gate. But yes, we did use targeted herbicide, so low volume backpack treatments with pest control advisors and pest control operators, targeting noxious weeds and undesirable vegetation. And this is what we were able to create in this particular footprint. Next slide, please. Now back to El Dorado County on SMUD's electric assets. And to give you an idea of where it is geographically, you'll see it in a couple of upcoming maps. Our first hydrogeneration facility starts in the Desolation Wilderness, not on federal land, but actually in the wilderness, which is really unique. I don't know any utilities that have electric assets inside the Desolation Wilderness. So our hydrogeneration facilities start there and make their way all the way into Sacramento. This, again, looking at this particular photo, what you're seeing is pollinator habitat created 12 months after our fuels reduction and mastication efforts, coupled with hand treatments, targeted treatments of herbicide of noxious weeds, which we are required to manage on federal land per our FERC license. Next slide. Another section of the right-of-way, conditions created 12 months after our work activities back in 2022. Again, on the federal land, forest health work, fuels reduction work that we completed. all coupled with no seeding, Mother Nature. This is what was created. The natural seed bank is there. We provided the opportunities for it to grow, and this is what she created. Next slide. This is what some of the right-of-ways look like before we started the fuels reduction work back in 2019. So there was work being done by SMUD in the easement right along that electric transmission corridor. And what you will see is in some future photos and some future LiDAR 3D point clouds, I'll be sharing with you the conditions that we created well outside our right-of-ways. Again, please don't forget that my focus is watershed health. We have a hydro generation electric facilities along there, catastrophic fires, massive volumes of erosion into those storage capacity facilities are devastating, and you don't fix that. So I'm looking at things on a much greater scale than just a linear electric distribution or transmission asset. Next slide. Sorry about this. I know that some of you had the benefit of seeing this on the ground. We had a field trip and many from the Wildfire Safety Advisory Board participated, as well as those from OEIS. This is just a quick look at things from what our footprint looks like up on the federal land. So as you print it out, you'll have a better look at it. I've got some better maps coming up, but this gives you a look at our assets. This is a bulk electric facility, 230,000 volt transmission line, and a 69 kV transmission line that supports our hydro generation facilities. Next slide. So this one, while it's a little difficult to read, this is actually one map straight from our partnership with the El Dorado National Forest. So the utility, we shared our data with the El Dorado National Forest, electric assets, all of our previous surveys and studies that we have done for years. Those are botany, wildlife, visual studies, because this is a huge recreation area. That reservoir that you're seeing about the middle right-hand part of that map is Union Valley Reservoir. Just over the hill at the very top of this graphic is the Lake Tahoe Basin, to give you additional perspective. So we are near the jewel of California as it relates to that particular natural resource. And what you're seeing along here is the red and orange lines are the electric transmission assets that traverse through the watershed, both on federal, private, and industrial timberland. And then all of the multicolored polygons that you see along that corridor in the legend are different surveys and different projects that the El Dorado National Forest already had set up and prepared to do fuels reduction work at landscape levels in this watershed. SMUD is committed to $250 million over 60 years of watershed and recreation improvements. We have a huge vested interest in making sure we're reducing fires regardless of ignition source in this area. So that was one of the partnerships. You'll hear several more as I go along, but that's one of the partnerships, and it doesn't happen very often. I'll be frank, I've worked on all these forests except for one forest in the southern part of the service area, the Angeles. I've never worked on the Angeles, but all others when I worked for PG&E I did. And there's very little synergy and partnership between the federal land managers who have done a lot of NEPA work, a lot of environmental studies and surveys. The data has just not always been captured well and cataloged well to share. So in most cases, when you come to do a work activity, the first question is, where's your NEPA? But in this particular case, you can see there was years and years, that's 11 years worth of projects set up by the El Dorado National Forest timber management officer on fuels reduction activities that they wanted to do very similar to the utility, and said, here's all the NEPA data. Next slide. Another map, just again, providing perspective and understanding. This is a bulk electric line. This 230,000 volt is a Western grid intertype. It has federal requirements on it, NERC federal requirements associated with our vegetation management activities. There's a zero tolerance regulation on that. I think folks are all aware of it. But on the 69 kV line, that's a critical backbone to support our hydro generation assets that traverses the majority of the El Dorado National Forest, as well as private and industrial timberland facilities. Next slide. Public information. Here's a decision memo that was provided to SMUD to do our fuels reduction work outside our easement. Our easement is anywhere from 50 feet wide on the 69 kV facility, so 25 feet from center line, or on the 230,000 volt lines, it's at the widest 200 feet. Our proposal was to do work well beyond that and include ingress and egress to support fire suppression units and access. We were clearing road access to get in and out of these facilities, along with doing the work along those assets. That was all in the public comment and the categorical exclusion that we provided. It took, I'll tell you what happened. It should have taken us 30 days to have this fully approved. The forest is a little concerned that we didn't do enough due diligence on public outreach, but we covered every public resource possible to provide visibility to this, including the tribes and others. We got one public comment after 60 days. It was a positive comment from the California Forest Association, requesting that everybody proceed as it was laid out in the CE. Just to say that 20 years ago, that probably wouldn't have been the case, but I do think things have changed, and there's a cross understanding, a real good understanding of the benefits that utilities can provide in these footprints with the work that they're doing. So no litigation, no pushback, no negative comments, one positive comment on this. And I'll show you some more details on it here. This is all available publicly. Anybody can access this. I'm happy to share it with you if you want it. So you don't have to find it on the Ethernet after hours of searching, but it's actually a pretty good platform for the work that we're all trying to accomplish. I wouldn't say it's perfect and it won't fit every niche, but I do think that there's at least some baseline information here that could help those that have not had a chance to or have not gone through this yet. Next slide. So this talks just a little bit about what I've already mentioned. The CE footprint, so the categorical exclusion footprint is that yellow polygon. The red line essentially is the electric transmission facilities or the conductors. The numbers that are there are all of our structure numbers. We have all of that GIS data available that we use to put into this CE. So if anybody wanted to know where they were at, they could find themselves geospatially and then find it on the ground. But this actually was one of those footprints to kind of lay out the conditions that were out there. The other item I would note here is in the legend you see in the upper right. Utility corridors can be really productive for wildlife once they're managed or if they're maintained with low-growing native plant communities. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, there's two sets of buffers or protected activity centers. One is spotted owls. The darkish blue polygons are all spotted owl protected activity centers where there have been known nest sites, I'm sure that was clear, and areas where we have observed spotted owls. They're riddled along the entire corridor. In many cases, when the work activities happen, the birds migrate and move and start to nest near the corridor, so they still have great trees to nest in, but that is their feeding and foraging area. Prior to that, the vegetation was too tall, and there was no way that they could forage in that corridor. trees are 5 or 10, 15 feet tall, they're chaparral and brush species, the birds can't get down to get a rat or a mouse or a rabbit. Now they can. So then they gravitate this way. But this was an area that was of concern when we put our CE in and thought, because there was a lot of trees that could strike our lines in these protected activity centers that had been avoided in the past because of the challenge with threatened and endangered species. We were able to work through that. The utility did. We did actually, I was out with the biologist multiple nights doing what they call owl hooting. So we were actually looking for owls back in 2019 and 2020 and 2021, and had those biologists pinpoint whether those birds, one, were nesting within a quarter of a mile in these protected activity centers, and two, were they actively nesting? So they may be there, but they may not be actively nesting. So we took some extra rigor to get through that process and ensure that we weren't impacting species or habitat, which obviously helped the federal agency and provided them a bunch of additional information. We shared our data with them. We also shared it with the industrial timber landowner, SPI. Next slide, please. So here, might not be super easy to see in the room, but what you're seeing is LiDAR images. On the left is a high definition video, and it's showing you the electric assets in the pink in the center of the conductors. The orange or goldenrod colors are the edge of the transmission easement. And on the right, you see the exact same image, which is a 3D LiDAR point cloud. Again, pink color is the conductors. The goldenrod is the edge of the easement. And then what you're seeing on the outside is the green trees are the trees that remain. And the silver or the periwinkle color trees, thank you very much, Mark. The periwinkle color trees are trees that have been removed. And that includes trees inside and outside, and some of them well outside that easement. Next slide, please. Here's change detection year over year. This is looking at these same transmission spans. The tower numbers are there depicted. Far left in orange is 2019. Conditions of our assets, right-of-ways, and vegetation conditions around them. 2021, what did it look like? You could see that there was a substantial difference in vegetation tall enough to strike the lines in that LiDAR 3D point cloud. And then on the far right, what did it look like September of 2023? And you're seeing at the bottom some analytics or quantitative data of the volume of trees that could strike our assets, 19, 21, and 23. So in this case, these three sets of spans, while we had 65 trees that could strike the line in 19 in these spans, we were down to 0 inside and outside the easement in 2023. That's a 69 kV asset. Next slide. Just another kind of look at conditions out there. On the left is a 3D point cloud, LiDAR 3D point cloud that is showing the conditions back in 2019. You see yellow and orange conditions. These are 150, 160 foot tall trees that are all over the El Dorado National Forest. Those are the conditions that were around our 69 kV asset. What does it look like in 2023? On the right is that 3D point cloud, September 2023. We actually just completed another flight, so we'll be getting additional data to show us what the conditions are as of probably October 2024. Next slide, please. So again, just LiDAR 3D point cloud showing you the conditions before, after. The yellow or the periwinkle or silver color trees are trees that have been removed. Those trees were all tall enough to strike our lines. They are all on federal land in these particular cases. But we did work 1,500 parcels from 2019 to present. Private industrial timber landowner and federally owned land doing these exact same conditions out there, doing work inside and or outside our easement in partnership with those landowners. We don't own any of this property. We're all there by easement. Next slide, please. Another 3D point cloud just showing you conditions. This is kind of these are slides that I've shown our insurance underwriters. So you may be asking, why am I showing these over and over again? Insurance underwriters understand this. Insurance underwriters have gotten just as savvy as litigators since 2010 in the state of California. They all understand this data. They don't understand hocus pocus databases that we all tend to use at times. Spreadsheets, internal databases from the utility. There's always skepticism. They know what LiDAR is. So when you bring this to them and you're asking them to manage your premium increases, these are the data sets I'm showing them. Next slide. Again, just conditions again. What were the conditions in 19 in orange? What were they in 21 in yellow? What do they look like in 23 in green at the bottom? Just showing you the volume and the quantitative reduction in numbers of trees that could strike assets and what it looks like now. Next slide. So we did get there. We were in a condition where we had lots of trees that could strike our lines. This is the El Dorado National Forest. This is phase 1. That log deck on the right-hand side of that screen is in concert with the El Dorado National Forest. The trees that you see in that log deck were all trees tall enough to strike our lines back in 2019, 2020, 2021. In partnership with El Dorado National Forest, we removed all those trees. They were decked, and the forest sold them as a deck sale.
So trees were taken out and the wood, you were able to remove the wood?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So all of those logs are now gone. They've been put on trucks and hauled to various mills, either in Lincoln, California, or Chinese camp in Jamestown. But all of that wood was used probably to build somebody's homes or decks somewhere in the state at this point. And you can see it's subtle, but it's worth pointing out that you're going to see in a number of these slides in the next couple coming, you see the fuels reduction work that was done outside the easement. This was at the expense of the utility. That forest on the right-hand side and the left-hand side did not have no small trees and no brush and chaparral and ladder fuels. It was riddled with ladder fuels. What you're seeing there now is all of that has been masticated and removed. So this is going to provide us benefit from a fire and consequences from a fire outside the right-of-way when it starts from a campfire, somebody's vehicle, or some other source. But it's certainly going to help with anything that happens in the right-of-way. And I would just say that there's massive volumes of recreation that goes on in this watershed. Tens of thousands of people every year in this watershed, and they travel these transmission roads. Next slide. Here's just some conditions before and after, just to give you some on the ground, standing in the same dirt. What did it look like on the left back in 2019? What does it look like in 2023 on the right? Same spans, same structures, same conditions. And what you see in the left-hand photo is a lucky condition. We came across that treetop that failed from a winter storm, that failed into that right away, and that's what you see in that left-hand photo, was the top of a tree that failed from snow loading, but it didn't strike the lines, fortunately. Next slide, please. So again, just talking a little bit about SMUD's conditions. In this particular case, mostly what I want to point out is the photo. You can see forest health work taking place outside the actual easement itself. The scattered trees, the tree spacing, the tree density of a healthy forest. Look what that forest looked like just to the left or just to the right of that. And that was what that condition looked like all the way up to the edge of the right-of-way. So really a paradigm shift with what's going on with utility, with us, SMUD, and the El Dorado National Forest at doing forest health work. They're mandated to do forest health work. They just aren't resourced and supported to do it when they need to. Next slide. Again, just another photo to kind of share the conditions that were created out there. This is coupled with mastication, handwork, traditional industrial logging, and the use of targeted herbicides on noxious weeds and undesirable species that are going to come back in there. Mother Nature's good at it. Noxious weeds and undesirable species usually outcompete the things that we want. We have to figure out ways to target those and manage them. So we are using herbicide on federal land and have been for probably close to a decade now. Again, we have a lot of noxious weed mandates to manage noxious weeds. Recreation team tends to grab those seeds in their ATVs, UTVs, and spread them all over the place, but we're required to manage those. So when we look at affordability as a utility, we can't allow seas of noxious weeds and vegetation to grow that we can't manage. So we need to be on it quickly and reduce those volumes over time. And where we can, as Nick points out, sure, we're using livestock, but in many cases, I can't train a goat not to eat an endangered plant species. And if I've got hundreds of those in an area, that means hundreds of exclusion areas. So we have to be real judicious about IBM treatments and technology and tools, and we're using all of those. These are just some of what we're using on our system. Next slide. I included this as it was part of the package that I handed out to those that made the field trip. Just give you some scientific data on the benefits of electric rights-of-ways on pollinator species. Kind of just gives you some perspective of what those conditions are out there. The left-hand photo is a photo of Smuts right away back in 2020-ish, and the conditions that were created. So thin plots versus non-thin plots, or forest health work versus non-forest health work. It's all about low-growing native plant communities and early successional habitat, and right-of-ways have that ability to create that for species, where unmanaged vegetation, as Paul pointed out, you're not getting that benefit for that wildlife or those species that you're hoping to propagate. Next slide. Just to give you some perspective on acreages, I included this in here. Total El Dorado National Forest land, 36,000, almost 37,000 acres. Our CE acres. So for this categorical exclusion, the one limitation is you can use a categorical exclusion up to 3,000 acres. Beyond that, you cannot use that as a mechanism for NEPA. As you can see, we were fortunate. Our CE acres, up to 1,000 feet wide, I would say, on our 230 kV line. I mentioned our right-of-ways were up to 200 feet wide. We are going to do work 1,000 feet, 500 feet from center line, where appropriate, where we can, where it makes sense. But we only had 2,400 acres in that footprint. Up to this point, we've only treated 600 acres, just shy, 590. The corridor miles are 31 from point A to point B, and the circuit miles on the federal land are 63. Next slide. So some of the results, and it gets into a reliability discussion as we continue. No vegetation-related outages. That includes record snowfalls, catastrophic weather events that we've all faced in the last 3 years. Call it climate change, call it climate evolution. Something is happening differently, and Mother Nature is giving us more aggressive events that we need to be managing for. That's the bottom line. We need to provide safe and reliable power to our customers, and we're going to need to plan for these kinds of events going forward. No vegetation-related outages. 22 and 23, even previous to that, if I dug back in our database, we're not there. We didn't have any vegetation sustained outages on this corridor. No related wildfire ignitions either. Obviously, we've impacted our consequences to our assets. Over 90% of the fire ignitions are non-utility related. That means things are burning into assets, and we are feeling those impacts. These work activities will reduce that impact or consequence to our assets, rebuilding, restoration after catastrophic events. And it's obviously, well, maybe arguably improved forest health in the area. Next slide. So I'll just leave you with this. This is actually 2023 record snow conditions out there. And I get a call on about the 8th day of catastrophic weather that we've been having. This is on the El Dorado National Forest. This is up near Union Valley Reservoir. It's on our 69 kV facility. And I'm hearing from our power systems operator, you have a tree down on our wires. And I'm saying, where is it at? Oh, it's up in this location between these towers and these towers. I said, it's not a tree outage. They said, yes, it is. It's a ground to conductor fault, which means something has struck those lines or is laying on those wires. Or there's a wire on the ground. And I said, get the snowcat, and I'm going to send an arborist with the construction crew. And that's the photos that he took. I said, take photos of all these conditions when you get out there. We flew the lines. That's the helicopter that you see in the upper left. That was a tree that failed into the right of way, but not tall enough to strike the lines during those snow events. No reliability issue. Those are the conditions that you saw when they traveled with that snowcat. And ultimately, I'll tell you what the condition was an equipment failure. It was a connector failure on our 69 kV line. We had a conductor down, but there wasn't a tree within dozens of spans tall enough to strike those facilities. And the reason I point that out is because there's a lot of vegetation management programs and utilities that don't do a thorough enough investigation of conditions out there. And then they say, it must be a tree. It must be a tree. It must be a tree. Well, if you start spending tens of millions of dollars on tree conditions that really aren't tree conditions, your utility is spending money in ways that are not going to drive reliability improvements, but it's going to impact affordability. So knowing what the conditions are critical. So I know I can go to sleep at night and I can, from the work we've done to try to reduce wildfire risk, we have a massive improvement in reliability and a lot of confidence that it's not going to be a tree condition out there when we have an interruption. Snow loading, ice loading, yes, not trees. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you.
Thank you very much.
Questions?
I'd like to first comment that these images are just fantastic. Talking about the Trinity service territory and the unhealthy forest that we saw yesterday, and how basically dense forest is not how we're supposed to be, and that the utility work here has helped foster a more natural system, which is going to foster stronger forest health in perpetuity. And so this went, upon becoming a member of this board, I thought to myself, how can the utility be part of a sustainable system? And you're showing evidence that that's possible. And I'm really inspired by that. Thank you.
We're really fortunate to have a solutions-oriented federal land manager, the El Dorado National Forest. So I've spent a lot of time having conversations at the region level, Region 5, which covers all forests. And I actually had Jen Gooberline out on this right away back on June 7th and said, we need to change what we're doing. Utilities can be a real part of the solution if the federal land manager will get to the table and look for solutions and not barriers. And I'm hoping that we can continue to have those conversations at Region 5 and pilot some more projects with some utilities doing similar work where those are interested. PG&E and Southern Cal Edison both want to do something similar, and I've run up to different barriers. So I'm looking to see if we can get leadership support at the federal level, at the chief level in Region 5 to have that conversation that we're continuing to run challenges at the local level, at the district level, or the forest level.
And my follow-up question is, where in your service territory have these meadows been optimal? Have they come back naturally? Because I'm assuming it's not your entire service territory.
Of course not. Most of these photos that you saw were on federal land, but we do have very similar results in areas where we have open space. There's a great area that I took folks that made the visit. Serrano, which is in El Dorado Hills, California, just over the Sacramento County border, right in El Dorado County. Serrano is actually where the governor lives or has a home. And that has 460 acres of open space that's not being managed by the homeowners association or community association. But there's 2 electric transmission corridors in there that was riddled with poison oak and yellow star thistle. Not being managed, allowed to propagate, and is going to create a massive fire at some point. So the work that we have done in there has now reduced the population of the yellow star thistle to almost nothing in the right of way. Outside of that, it's still a mess. It's still not good. And it's like, that's what we will continue to have to ever work for yellow star thistle, because the outside of the easement or outside the right of way is not being managed. So we'll continue to get deer that come in there, squirrels, rabbits, humans on bikes. They're going to keep propagating and moving the seed in there after we've already reduced those populations. So it is happening on private land as well. It's just less visible as it is on the federal land, at least for us.
Yeah, I've had an opportunity to be able to go on a site tour with Eric on a couple of occasions, and I've just been completely impressed with what it is that you've been able to achieve. And, the partnerships that you describe, the creativity that you brought to bear in order to be able to, do your vegetation management. And so I really appreciated all of that. When we were talking to Paul with regard, I would love to be able to give my time to Paul in order to be able to ask a question, but I'll take the risk of just shining a really bright light on my ignorance here and try and formulate a question. But, Paul's presentation caused my antenna to go up in that he's describing a situation within his service territory that he's being prohibited from being able to do the line clearance in order to be able to mitigate his risk. And I asked him if he felt as though there were other utilities within the state that found themselves similarly situated, where they have power lines through federal property. They need to be able to go through the permitting process in order to be able to reduce the risk of their equipment being responsible for wildfires. And here you described several scenarios that you've used in order to be able to develop your partnership, and the categorical exclusion and other things that you use in order to be able to do your vegetation management. And the question that I would have is similar to what I had asked Paul, and that is, do you think that measures like that are sufficient in order to be able to get to all the power lines that are in federal property, and we're able to do the proper vegetation management in order to be able to reduce their risk, or reduce the wildfire risk that we have as a result of that equipment?
Well, I would say the short answer is yes, Tim, but I will say that I didn't probably do enough justice to the time that went into this. I talked about a short time period on the CE, but I will tell you, I was on the Fire Safe Council in El Dorado County when I first started at SMUD back in 2016, and I could see what was happening in the utility space. Pick a spot in California in 2016 that didn't have a catastrophic mega fire destroying things, and I could see it happening everywhere. And I was regularly telling all of my peers and colleagues on the Fire Safe Council, SMUD is coming. We are going to be doing something different. I promise you, we are not going to continue with what we're continuing to do. I need to go to sleep at night, and I need to know that the work that we're doing is going to make a difference at reducing risk, reducing ignitions for us as a utility. And I started that campaign regularly. I met with the Forest Service regularly. I met with local groups, cities, counties, CAL FIRE, Caltrans, pick the person that would listen, and I would let them know something is going to change with us. So it didn't happen overnight. I started that discussion in 2017 regularly. We actually physically started our work in 2019. But it also requires some subtleties that I didn't even put up here. It's buried in that definition of paradigm shift. You must go to the federal landowner, or you must go to the private property owner, you must go to the industrial timber landowner with a set of contractors and consultants that they will have confidence in, that they have trust in. How did I get that done in 60 days? That CE, I hired 5 different people for a fairly small amount of money that had previously worked on the El Dorado National Forest in various different environmental capacities. So when I brought them to the table, we went and sat down. They're looking at a peer and colleague they worked with for 30 years. They trust in everything that they did. So we actually wrote all of the documents. The federal landowner was supposed to write them. We wrote them all. Didn't take that much money. I'm talking $25,000, $30,000 for this, but it is the lowest level of NEPA. So we need to change. We can't continue to go into having conversations with landowners or large landowners and using maybe traditional utility vegetation management folks that are not prepared to log. They will tell you they are, but they may not be. And that erodes trust, erodes confidence, and then you run into barriers left and right. So I think there's a lot to things that aren't shown here that I didn't share when I say paradigm shift. You have to bring the right resources to the table. And when people don't have confidence, and they're on the line, right? An impact to a resource as a federal land manager could be devastating to you in your career. If you allow something to happen on your watch, you're probably more likely to say no than yes. It's almost like an IT info security person. At this point, they're going to tell you no 20 times before they even consider saying yes for some new technology. I don't see it being that much different with the federal agency, but if you bring a package of trusted resources, I think you've greased the skids a little bit. You've helped yourself gain a leg up. You providing leverage, you're also providing them the confidence that you're using trusted professionals, folks that they have confidence in. So I think those are the differences for us. I also had great support. I mean, I had phenomenal leadership support and board support starting in 2018. When we started this discussion, everybody was supporting this across the board, all of our executives, all of our board members. Because I knew any of those could change at any given day and we can't start over. I'm with Paul, the clock is ticking. Every tree branch that's out there tall enough to strike or fall into, it's a risk. And Mother Nature is not going to stop. So these conditions will continue to persist and we need to reduce the risk. Span by span, pole by pole, every single day.
Can you give me an order of magnitude as to the effect that, the vegetation management practices that you've been able to gain support for and achieve the accomplishments that you've described has had on your budget?
I would just say that we were in a similar scenario as Paul as it relates to funding for our vegetation management program when I got this fund in 2016. It has increased exponentially since then. So that is another component of support, right? I get confidence in operational support, but I also get confidence in financial support from our CFO. And I knew this was not a one and done activity. I said, I must go in with a business case that is going to get me 5 years of time and 5 years of funding. And I need everybody to support this because we can't do it in 1 year. It's unreasonable to operationally try to do it in 1 year, let alone financially. So that we did, consultants and contractors, to all of our in-house staff, supporting the work out in the field and interacting with landowners and property owners. Trust and support. We did a lot of extra things as well. Nick points out hauling wood. I cut a lot of wood into firewood links. I'm not going to start them a fire in the winter, but I caught a lot of firewood for a lot of people in the foothills. And I moved it into spots where they could actually get and access it. Cost us more money, but I look at it as they're my neighbors. That utility corridor, we aren't going anywhere. Our hydro facilities aren't going anywhere. Those electric assets are going nowhere. I need to be your neighbor forever. So a little bit up on the front end gets me a lot of benefit on the back end. So I have to ask permission to use herbicide. If they have noxious weeds all over, we're not going to go out and hand pull them all. We need to use the right integrated vegetation management tool for the right scenario. So I need their support doing those kinds of things as well. Thank you.
I do have a question. So with this paradigm change that you brought to SMUD and in the POU community that you are part of, have you have you pushed to right size it for your partners?
And that is a great question, because that happens all the time. Every time I share this information, the question of scalability comes out.
Yeah.
And I'll share with you this answer is, even if I only had 2 years to do the work or I had a limited dollar amount, I would have started doing this in the highest, most extreme risk locations possible. And I would have worked backwards out of that or minimized our risk from where we started. I think every footprint, every condition, every geographic, every demographic scenario is different. I don't think this fits for everybody. I really don't. But if your right-of-ways themselves are not in good condition, you have to start there. You're not going to start with doing forest health work 200 feet outside your easement when you have 200 or 2,000 miles in front of you. Pick one of the utilities. If you got 20,000 miles of transmission line, you better get your easements in good shape before you start thinking about doing fuels reduction work outside. So that's why I say everybody is on a journey. We're just in different spots on this journey. Some of them are a little more mature than others, but it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. I always liken it to people in an urban setting that have a grass, have a lawn. You can choose to mow your lawn and then go on vacation for 2 months and see what the jungle is. It's no different than brush or trees. They're continually growing. Most utilities struggle with dynamic scenarios because most of them don't deal with them. They'll deal with pipes, wires, and poles. All poles in particular are dead trees. They're not growing anymore, but I'm dealing with something growing constantly. So I don't think this is the answer for everyone. But I do think there are bits and pieces that could be used to help tailor or at least manage a barrier for a particular agency. What I found with the federal agencies is when they get confidence that someone else has already been the tip of the spear, they've already been out there, they've already done it, they're a little more lenient or understanding, like, yeah, maybe we can do that too. I can use their footprint or use their path, and we're less reliant or less challenges. Yes, they have more resources, but they got more wire. So it's all relative. They have a similar challenge, and back to Tim's question, pick a utility. They will all tell you at some point in time in their career they've had a huge challenge with an agency and a barrier or a delay or a postponement. And sometimes those conversations aren't that fun to start with. I'll tell you, I remember some really ugly conversations with federal landowners where we had to send letters at the legal level to say, we're coming to do this work. It's not full-blown risk reduction, fuels, and forest health work, but Even individual trees, we've had barriers for decades at federal owners, with federal owners. So that's why I think having a conversation at the region level and getting support from the region chiefs so that this is, you know, bipolar going both directions, you can get some movement and you're getting clear direction. Federal land managers have the mandate to do forest health work. Bipartisan infrastructure bill, the omnibus bill, look back at all of them. They all have mandates to do forest health and fuels reduction work. How many of them actually completed it? So there's a lot of things that happen in DC that never make it here. But now that Randy Moore's in DC, he's got a pretty favorable interest in Region 5, considering he grew up here. Hoping to see if we can get some synergies there and, you know, change the paradigm and actually get some work accomplished and executed on federal land, where it's just sitting there waiting for the next catastrophic event to burn over the top of it.
Thank you very much. Board Member Mader, do you have any comments or questions?
Well, the one thing that struck me was, you know, the idea that the blaming everything solely on trees and the necessity to treat vegetation management, you know, from a much larger perspective. From it's not just the trees. There's all kinds of issues, and you know, thinking about the largest wildfire that was started by a tree that, from all videos, looked like it had green roots and fell into a tree line or into energized lines. That's what strikes me, and it seems like we're all kind of learning learning this as in the last 5 years together, no matter what utility you're with.
I think I agree. I think outage investigations in general for utilities are critical, so that you can, one, confirm the cause, and then approach it with whatever resource pool or approach you're going to do. If it's an equipment failure, I shouldn't be doing tree work, and vice versa. If it's a tree failure, I shouldn't be doing equipment work to try to fix the problem, because I'm going to spend a lot of money and I'm not going to improve reliability. It's going to cause a lot of grief internally, and it's going to cause a lot of grief to affordability over time. So having a clear understanding of what the outage cause is critical, because it's not always tree removal that will solve the outages. So there's ways to surgically do this work if you know how the tree is failing or the type of tree that's failing. Pick any service territory. There's thousands of different subspecies out there. If you don't know which tree is failing and how it's failing, then you're going to go do a lot of work before you possibly find those needles in the haystack that are going to make an improvement. But
I just remember.
Go ahead.
I remember early in this, you know, in the effort to come up with instruction on wildfire mitigation plans, and so many people were putting input in, like, really wanted the utilities to manage the forests. And what they need to realize is that that they've been trying to transfer that responsibility to the utilities and their response. And we really have to look at the work that you're doing, and the vegetation management and the other utilities of, like, managing the forest that interacts with us, with the utility.
Yeah, I mean, I think the federal land managers in many cases are in a spot where they're in a bind. We've had catastrophic events. Have they been managing their forests properly? I think everybody can argue a different point there. The bottom line is I don't think they've been managing them well. And that's why these mega fires have continued to happen. And they are catastrophically devastating for that ecosystem for centuries, not a generation, not a time frame, not a decade, but centuries. They're destroyed. And they don't get resourced properly to do the work that they need to do. As I have mentioned on that one slide, there was 11 years worth of fuels reduction projects shovel ready. That meant every bit of NEPA was done. Every time that timber management officer tried to go execute on those projects, they had a fire and they had other details that they were required to do restoration. So everything stops. You take all your resources and you go to restoration. For how long? 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Well, all that's sitting there waiting for the next catastrophic event to burn over the top of it. You spend millions of dollars doing all of these NEPA documents, and one catastrophic event burns over the top of it. You were never able to implement that, but you just spent tens of millions of dollars doing environmental surveys. But you're not reducing the risk. And there's got to be a way that there's better synergy between large landowners, industrial timberland, BLM, federal and state landowners, where there's a more synergy happening because everybody has somewhat similar goals. Improvements in risk reduction, forest health improvements. But we're not all moving in the right spot. Pushing in different spots on the balloon and it's moving all around, but it's not, it needs to be better organized. Right now, we're not.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No more comments from board members, correct? Thank you all so much, Nick, Eric, Paul. These were fantastic presentations, really fruitful. You'll be hearing from us following up. We'll have lots of questions. Also, our next board meeting in December, we'll have our recommendations for our POU, WOQ reviews. So this will certainly inform that deeply, for me at least. Can I ask Unique for public comments? Well, first, any public comments in the room? Jessica.
I want to thank everyone for their presentations. They were really great. And I wanted to specifically just ask Eric a little bit about the categorical exclusion and the use of that. I feel like that really, it sounds like it made a big difference in your ability to execute on the work, as far as just cost and time, just expediting the whole process and saving money and being able to lower that risk immediately. And so I think that is a great tool to be able to use. It really cuts down on your 40,000 page NEPA document and it kind of front loads that there's going to be less litigation because you're already assuming that there's agreement with the categorical exclusion. And so I see that and I see the value of that. And I also hear you saying that there is a role for maybe having the Wildfire Safety Advisory Board helping us be that trusted advisor or trusted. You said you spent a lot of time building relationships and making sure that they trusted your intentions. And that may be something that we can try to work together on and getting the Wildfire Safety Advisory Board to push forward some more categorical exclusions and come to the table and, and make the urgency move a little faster. I also appreciate what you said about the regional level, and that might be something also that we could work on together is just getting the regional Forest Service. You've had so many great successes. It sounds like if we could translate that to a lot of other forests, that might be really beneficial.
I agree, because I went down the road of what Paul is having to do when I worked at a different utility on the Plumas National Forest. That photo that you saw in the Plumas National Forest was 8 dog years of life trying to get, and it was. I'll be real candid. I have the same character flaw as Paul. I will say that it was 8 dog years, but I learned a lot in those 8 dog years of going through that process of an EIR to try to get the work done we needed to do on Plumas National Forest. It was successful because another character flaw, I don't quit. So I was able to navigate that. But the CE, that categorical exclusion requires you to have a willing partner. You cannot dance alone. You can bump into people on the dance floor, but you're not going to walk out there hand in hand and be successful. That's my analogy. I have a willing partner on the El Dorado National Forest. I am doing everything I can to leverage for our peers and colleagues the need to have the region get engaged and apply appropriate levels of leadership on their forest supervisors, which then translate down to the districts and say, we are going to do this work. I think it needs to be managed at the region level. I think it needs to be overseen at the region level. There needs to be metrics and targets at the region level. Every month you need to report out. You have a pilot project on the Shasta Trinity. How many miles of work have you accomplished? How much fuels reduction work? How many acres have you completed? There's no accountability right now at those granular levels. So it gets lost in the mix. Happy to share all of the benefits, and I would recommend if you're going to try to pursue this, even if you have more than 3,000 acres worth of work, find a 3,000 acre footprint that you want to target. That's high risk. That's extreme fire threat. And reach out to me, and I will get you in touch with your peers and colleague Forest Service personnel that can talk to your Forest Service personnel and say, here's how we navigated this. Because our forest was scared. They were scared to death of this and thought, there's no way you can do this. And I pushed on it hard enough where they went to the region office and said, we need you to analyze this and review it before we put it out for public comment, because we're not certain if we're going to be able to do this, and we need your backing. They wanted cover, right? They wanted senior leadership cover. They got it. So if I can connect the dots between a couple of forest personnel and agencies so that you have some key personnel to talk to, and your team has that, might be helpful in your pursuit. Happy to do it.
Any other public comments in the room? Okay. Unique, any public comments in email or any other choices?
Teams, any hands up on
Oh, yeah.
Teams?
No public comment.
Okay. Board Member Maynard, do you have any further comments?
Thank you, Chairman Block. The last 3 years I've been assigned the Northern Public Utility District utilities to review their mitigation plans. And I just have to say, I expect great work from SMUD, and I see that. I see smaller utilities like Trinity doing extraordinary work with the resources that they have. But in particular, I have to call out Reading Electrical Utility, Director Zettel, your engineers at Reading have what I would say is the best example of what a medium resource public utility should be looking to do. The work, just the thorough thoughtfulness of your mitigation plan and your consideration of all types of different factors is particularly noted for its sophistication given the size of your utility. And I just say professionally, my compliments.
Well, thank you, and I'll definitely relay that to the team. I think listening to today's been great. I'm going to give a public comment again. And Paul nailed it. Very small, kind of small to kind of large, right? It's almost
In the
POU space. Yeah, it's almost at 10x, right? And I think that I think that at SMUD and Trinity and Plumas, right, and anywhere, it's what POUs do best, I think, is we try to use the resources that we can to the maximum extent before we run into the barriers. We don't want to run into the barriers first. We don't have to. So I appreciate the compliment. I think that, I do kind of joke that Reading is the biggest solar utility in the world. And we're very blessed to have, a talented team, and a team that really cares. I think that that's the other thing I, listening to Eric and Paul is this is our town. This is our community. And we have to adjust it to match the risk. I don't have a national forest fire risk, right? But I have a fire risk that I'm in a highly populated area with fast moving brush fires that could immediately be into a subdivision before you would ever imagine. And so my plan has to be tailored to my risk. And that's why a fire response package is so important. That's why the ground clearing is so important and pushing outside with fuel breaks in the areas and dealing with where the fires come from. So, yeah, I mean, this has been great for me to be here today, and thank you for the feedback from the board. And I'll relay that to the team. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I will move on to our final agenda item, which is just talking about proposed items for future meetings. Are there any board members who have recommendations for future items to discuss? John, raise your hand if you have one.
Well, I think that, we haven't seen, I mean, the season's not over and I don't want to jinx anything, but we haven't seen, utility caused wildfires for the last couple of years. And I'd really be interested in finding a way to measure how much of that is due to weather, how much of that is due to the application of fast tripping protection devices or other techniques. It's hard to prove a negative, right? But if, are we seeing something that's transitory, or is it something that we can start to project out on, and like how we should allocate resources to mitigate wildfire risk? I think that's an important question and worthy of trying to find out how much of an answer we can get.
Noted. Thank you. Board members?
No items.
Yeah, just one, I think that we need to explore absolutely how the collaborative nature of Region 5 becomes more ubiquitous throughout the state. That seems to be a huge hurdle. And trying to figure out a way that we create a pathway to that dialogue, what that relationship looks like, and again, how we right size and leverage those relationships.
Also noted. Are there any public comments for this item in the room? Any in Teams or by email? No public comments. Okay. Then, seeing none, we can we have a general public comment option at the end of the meeting.
Anything that was not on the agenda?
For anything that was not on the agenda. I see none in the room, and are there any? No. All right. Thank you, everybody. That means we are here. We are ready to adjourn. Again, I've said this a couple of times, but this has been a tremendously fruitful visit for us. Thank you, everyone, for all of what you've shared, and really eager to continue the conversation. Let's see, for those listening, for any further contact, please email us at wsab@energysafety.ca.gov. This meeting is adjourned. Over staying late.